Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honor to rise at report stage to speak to Bill C-15. In the 7 minutes I have, I'm going to try to be very economical and focus on a few points that have been mentioned by other members. I have a very strong view about the improper use of omnibus budget bills, and I want to reflect on the history of omnibus budget bills briefly. The mandate letter to the Honourable Government House Leader makes it clear that, quote, this government he's directed, quote, to end the use of the improper use of omnibus bills. So having fought very hard against Omnibus Budget Bill 2012, Omnibus Budget Bill C-38 in spring of 2012, I want to canvass this because I think it's important for me to say out loud, this is not an improper use of an omnibus bill, but it comes dangerously close. Omnibus budget bills between 1995 and the year 2000 were generally around 12 pages long. The biggest omnibus bill that I'd seen was in spring of 2005, under the previous Liberal government of Paul Martin. It topped 120 pages, and people, including, at that time, the leader of the official opposition, who went on to become Prime Minister and became the champ of all inappropriate uses and improper uses of budget bills, actually protested that the Martin government's 2005 budget bill at 120 pages was too long. This one at 179 pages is clearly the longest omnibus budget bill from a Liberal government, but it's a piker compared to the abuse of democracy that we saw under the previous Conservative regime. We saw in the year 2010 an omnibus budget bill, wait for it, 883 pages long. We saw in spring of 2012 an omnibus budget bill that was 440 pages long, but in the fall it had part two, another 400 pages long. What makes an omnibus bill appropriate? What makes it inappropriate? If you are in one piece of legislation working to a single purpose, and all pieces of the legislation stem from that single purpose, it's an omnibus bill, all right, but it's not improper. If you do what happened in spring 2012 in Bill C-38 and you destroy our Environmental Assessment Act, not mentioned in the budget, you destroy the Fisheries Act, you repeal the National Roundtable on Environment and Economy, you repeal the Kyoto Implementation Act, you change the National Energy Board Act, no fewer than 70 laws were changed that time. So let's not muddy the waters, but a warning to my friends in the Liberal government, don't tread too far. This one should have split out the commercialization of the wheat board. We needed to study that separately. But overall, this one is not an improper use of omnibus bills. It just flirts with the word improper. What's good about this and what's not good about it? Well, obviously, there's much in this budget to like. I was disappointed because I thought there would be more to like, and there are two specific elements I must mention before we move to SO31s that are really unfortunate and, in fact, egregious. But in terms of the good things, there's changes to the employment insurance program that I welcome. But like many groups, including those who testified before the Finance Committee, we need to go farther and fix EI to get back to the systems we had before the changes of the Conservative regime. So while it's certainly better to have the changes that we just made, I tried in committee to make amendments to deal with the long-tenured worker, the idea that you have to work for 7 years to qualify for those pieces. We have not yet seen the reversal of the changes to seasonal workers. We need to see that. In the case of child poverty, this child benefit program, and I agree with the Canadian Teachers Federation, they described it as a good first step to alleviate childhood poverty. But I found this evidence from the Canadian Federation of Teachers really telling, and we should all take it on board as parliamentarians. They said, each day in our classrooms, Canadian teachers engage with children and youth who are hungry, tired, and struggling due to poverty, close quote. I talk to teachers all the time. We need to do much more for our children. This is just a very small first step. I'd also say that for our veterans, they kept the promise to open the veterans' offices across Canada that were wrongfully closed. They have done some things that will change the permanent impairment allowance and the grade determination. This is an improvement, but we still need much, much more to be done for our veterans, just as we do for pensioners. The National Pensioners Federation made the same point. When you look at the increase in GIS for pensioners, it's very welcome, but you know what? It's $2.60 a day. The maximum improvement for poor seniors in this budget is $2.60 a day. That's not enough. The sections that were egregious, Mr. Speaker, and there is more that I like in the budget: cultural industries, better deals for students, although the money needs to be improved. The two pieces that are completely egregious are found on page 221, where the fossil fuel subsidy to liquefied natural gas is left in place until 2024. This is a violation of the Liberal election promise to end subsidies to fossil fuels. And also at page 167, we see and 166, a commitment to keep environmental assessment in place under the C-38 version, which, as I just mentioned, destroyed our environmental assessment regime. Specific references to continuing to fund SEIA under SEIA 2012 is offensive to any of us who understand environmental law. I look forward to an opportunity to continue later, Mr. Speaker. Resuming where I more or less left off, I'm speaking to C-15 at report stage, and I had earlier canvassed a couple of key points. One is that this is not an improper use of an omnibus bill, but it certainly is an omnibus bill. It does stay and pertain to one central theme, which is implementing budget 2016. I do remain concerned, however, that we should have spent more time, and I mentioned one item in particular where I think that the current Liberal government may be flirting with the accusation of it being improper, particularly around one item, which we did spend some time on in Finance Committee, but not enough, and that's that the Clause 38 adds Section 135(2) in relation to tax-deferred treatment for transactions under the continuation of the Canadian Wheat Board. It would have been good to have had this in a separate piece of legislation. The chair of our Finance Committee pursued the matter with some departmental officials to know, well, what happened to the assets of the Canadian Wheat Board? There was billions of dollars there. Where did that money go? How do we find out where it went? We know that in respect of the tax consequences of the trust created in connection with the continuation of the Canadian Wheat Board, that the debt of the Wheat Board acquired by the trust is not included in the trust's income. But we don't know what happened to the assets of the Canadian Wheat Board, which is a rather substantial question, and whether they were, as was expected, transferred to prairie farmers. It appears they weren't, but that's an item that would have been better handled had this part of the budget bill been separated out so it could be properly studied. There are other aspects, Mr. Speaker, that I did not have enough time to address before we stopped for our member statements and question period. And I want to revisit one of them in particular that I described as egregious moments ago. And let me explain why. And that's found in the budget, and also, of course, the funds are provided in Bill C-15. And that, on the face of it, if you didn't know this issue well, you'd think, well, that's great. They're providing funding for the improved process under the National Energy Board for looking at environmental assessments. The reason I found it egregious, and I'll read from the budget at page 166. Budget 2016 proposes to provide $14.2 million over 4 years to the Canadian Environmental Assessment Agency to support the agency in fulfilling its responsibilities under the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act 2012. Further up in the same page, there's a similar suggestion that money will be provided, $16.5 million over 3 years, to support the National Energy Board implementing the interim approach that was announced earlier this year by the Minister of Environment and Minister of Natural Resources. What must not be lost in this discussion of environmental assessment is that the current state of Canadian environmental assessment law is full stop unacceptable. It is a failure. It is a process that doesn't work. It doesn't examine all parts of the environment, nor does it allow the right agency to do the review. So having National Energy Board do environmental assessments at all is a departure from Canadian environmental law. It's a departure from the National Energy Board's area of expertise, and it's completely unworkable. So we need to go back and revisit the changes that were made in Bill C-38 and repair the Environmental Assessment Act for good, which is not based on interim measures being spread out for a further 3 to 4 years with funding to operate under interim measures to fix a broken process. It would be far better for all concerned, including industry stakeholders. I was speaking the other day with the Canadian Mining Association leadership. They said they had never wanted the changes that happened in C-38. They don't find the process better. So we need to fix the process, not fund a kind of a Rube Goldberg device to try to make something unfixable slightly better. So those are my main concerns with the budget. I find myself, although I like this budget a lot more than anything I've read for the last 10 years, I can't vote for it because of the continuation of fossil fuel subsidies and the continuation of funding a broken EA process.